prayer for the nation.
My prayer for this prayer breakfast is we start to see each other again.
On Capitol Hill, the president headlines the historic 70th anniversary of the National Prayer Breakfast, plus the #1 threat to the U.S.
The era of trusting Communist China is over.
House Republicans zero in on the Chinese Communist Party. And ahead of the 2024 presidential race, a contender at the top of the list sits down with CBN News.
It's time. Sometimes it takes a woman.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Prayers for America. Good evening in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder. Today marked the 70th annual National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C., a tradition that calls on lawmakers to set aside their differences and unite for a morning of prayer. But this year's breakfast was different. Returning to the event's roots, it was on Capitol Hill and much smaller, open to just lawmakers. In years past, the event was at the Washington Hilton and hosted nearly 2,000 people. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson here now with tonight's top story and the president's call for unity. Abigail?
Well, Jenna, speaking to a bipartisan group of House and Senate members, President Biden preached a message of unity and hope and encouraged them to follow God's commandments.
Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy mind, and all thy soul. And love thy neighbor as thyself.
He acknowledged loving thy neighbor is hard on Capitol Hill, but it doesn't need to be.
My prayer for this prayer breakfast is we start to see each other again, look at each other again, travel with each other again, argue like hell with each other again, but then still go to lunch together.
And he promised to lead by example through his relationship with Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy.
Let's start treating each other with respect. That's what Kevin and I are going to do. Not a joke. We had a good meeting yesterday. I think we got to do it across the board. Doesn't mean we're going to agree and fight like hell, but let's treat each other with respect.
And he asked them, where do we go from here?
My message to all of you and to the nation is we go forward. We go forward together. Let's be the doers of the word. Let's keep the faith. Let's remember who we are. We're the United States of America.
The event also featured messages from Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie.
What a powerful message it would be to the world if we walked together, put compassion over callousness, cooperation over competition, and at the end of it go and do likewise.
And Pastor Jim Cymbala.
But everyone who humbles themselves and comes to God and says, God help me, God has given his word, I will never, ever turn you away. I will give you the very thing that you need. If anyone needed to pray for wisdom, isn't it you folks every single day, every single hour? Come on, can we put our hands together to that?
And in addition to today's prayer breakfast, every week on Capitol Hill, bipartisan groups of senators and House members come together to pray, and it's a tradition that has been going on for decades. Jenna?
All right, White House correspondent Abigail Robertson, thank you very much. And here now for more, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. So, David, the president delivered a message of unity. We heard several bites there in Abby's story, talking about working together, respecting one another, disagreeing, but then coming together to have lunch. What did you make of his prayer breakfast speech today?
Well, Jenna, I don't want to be the guy that rains on the parade, especially a prayer parade, okay? But look, here's the truth of the matter. It's one thing to say certain nice, unifying things, phrases. It's another thing to put them into practice and actually do them. And Joe Biden has shown ever since he was inaugurated as president, he has a track record of divisiveness. I mean, he has called out MAGA numerous times, and it's not just calling them out on principle. He's calling them out by name in a very ferocious and vicious way, in essence, demonizing them to the rest of the American public. And so when you do that, you're gonna have a hard time going to a prayer breakfast in the morning saying, let's all come together. Well, if you're all going to come together, I think it's important that you don't actually condemn 30, 35, maybe even 40% of this country. I think that's where the rubber meets the road here.
Yeah. He talked about working with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. We'll see if he can do that, and if things continue to go well there. We'll hope. Next week, President Biden will deliver the State of the Union. David, today it was announced Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders will deliver the Republican response. Your thoughts on that? You know, a lot of people in the Republican Party might say she's too MAGA. What do you think?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump loves her, so I guess that's a cardinal sin right now, according to liberals and the left. If Donald Trump likes you, then I guess you can't be in this position. I mean, it's a bit ridiculous on its face. Having said that, I understand the ties to MAGA. I'll just simply say this. She's now obviously the governor of Arkansas. She's up and coming. She's young. And more than that, she's actually going to, and my expectation is at the State of the Union rebuttal, she will talk a lot about parental rights. She'll talk about local school boards and the PTA, and she's a mom herself. And it's going to be very homey, if you will. And so I think it was actually a very good choice, because I believe that the Republicans are starting to understand the memo. We're starting to see some news come out about this today. That is that parental rights, what's going on in the schools from a CRT, critical race theory perspective, from gender ideology in the classroom, all of that. I believe that the Republicans believe that's a winning political ticket to fight for in 2024. And I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders will speak to that, and that's why she was chosen.
Yeah, we all know she's good at reacting in real time. We saw her, day after day as press secretary for President Trump. The Republican-led House today ousted Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee over past anti-Semitic comments. David, your reaction to that?
Well, look, I mean, this is political retribution. And the truth of the matter is, this is what we say all the time, which is true, Jenna. Elections have consequences. And these are the consequences for some of the more outspoken figures in the Democratic Party. And it's not just Ilhan Omar and some of what many describe as anti-Semitic remarks and tropes throughout the years. I mean, Adam Schiff was removed, and you can go down the list. So, look, I mean, this is Republicans showing that they are in charge. And to a degree, there's always a political element to it. But for sure, for Kevin McCarthy to say, hey, look, I had a tough time getting to be Speaker of the House. I'm finally Speaker of the House, and I'm going to show to the deep conservative base that I'm serious about this, and we're going to send a message not just to the Democrats, but also to my conservative colleagues to say, hey, we're going to get rid of some of what they consider problems on committees.
All right. David Brody, we'll leave it there. We should tell viewers you and I will be hosting CBN's State of the Union coverage on Tuesday, so we're looking forward to that. David, thank you.
Yes, I'm going to bring a pint of ice cream, maybe two.
I'll have the popcorn. Thanks, David.
All right. Yeah.
Well, to the economy, record high inflation is still rattling the country, but the labor market does continue to look strong. This, according to the new jobless claims report out today. New jobless claims falling by 3,000 to 183,000. That's better than many economists expected, and the lowest since April of last year. This is continuing unemployment claims went down 11,000, now at around 1.6 million. And for more on this, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate.com. Mark, good to see you this evening. So jobless numbers stable, even as we see some big tech companies carry out major layoffs. Do these big tech job cuts signal that other companies could soon follow suit?
I think we will see further distribution or widening of some of these job cut announcements. It really matters a lot here, Jenna, about whether the economy enters into an actual recession here in the coming months or not. And there's been, I would say, a growing optimism that a so-called hard landing in the economy might be avoided, but this occurs at a time, of course, when the Federal Reserve says that interest rates need to go higher, they need to stay higher for longer to totally vanquish historically high inflation or the remaining inflation we have. We had data just today from the outplacement firm Challenger Gray and Christmas, showed a big increase in job cut announcements in the latest month, predominantly in technology. Presumably, some of those people are going to find work. Some of them probably will end up filing for unemployment claims as well. But as you said, we've seen those numbers, the new claims for unemployment benefits fall to the lowest level since April.
Mm-hmm. The January jobs report is due out tomorrow. Mark, what are you expecting with that?
That's expected to portray further moderation in the job market. Last year, Jenna, we averaged 375,000 jobs added per month. That's quite high. And now we're beginning to see that level down or level off. And we saw that, for example, in the final 3 months of last year. And so we would expect the number of jobs added in January for the latest month, that's the month we're getting these numbers for, to fall below December's level. And it is expected that we'll see the unemployment rate go back up to 3.6%. It's been sort of dancing around that level to 3.5, 3.6 in recent months. And that's still a relatively low unemployment rate.
Yeah. A big day today for the stock market, Mark. Facebook's parent company Meta clocking its best day in 10 years. Do days like this tell you anything about the overall state of the economy? Your thoughts on that?
It tells us a lot about investor sentiment right now, Jenna, and that is that investors bid stock prices up by 6% in the month of January, and we're seeing technology stocks lead the way once again. Sort of stop me if you've heard this before. And basically, investors are betting that the Federal Reserve is not going to keep to the words that Jerome Powell uttered here this week, that they intend to be substantially more invested in trying to restrain inflation going forward. Another way of saying that is investors are betting that we actually are getting very close to the end of this rate-raising cycle, and we'll see who's right. It may well be that we're seeing the relaunch of a bull market here, or this could be just a rebound within a bear market, and that's why we have to wait and see. And for the average person, if they're investing for their retirement, they need to stay invested for the long term anyway.
Mark Hamrick with the Bank Rate. Always good to see you. Thank you, Mark. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Well, the Pentagon calls it the #1 threat to the U.S. Coming up, the GOP strategy to protect U.S. interests from China. Chaos at the southern border. The now one House Republican is introducing articles of impeachment against Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The articles come as House Republicans hold a series of hearings examining the problems at the U.S.-Mexico border. Many believe Mayorkas is largely responsible.
That high crime and misdemeanor has typically been defined as a public official who has lost or violated the public trust. And in this case, Secretary Mayorkas has done it. And then some in that debate said, we want them to be able to be removed if we can't wait till the next election to remove somebody because of their conduct is so egregious as to cause potentially permanent harm to the country. That's what's happening here.
Congressman Biggs bringing those articles of impeachment. It's unclear if enough Republicans are for the impeachment process, but Biggs tells CBN News he believes House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is on board. Well, another top issue for the Republican-controlled House is China. Leading lawmakers are expected to create a select committee to counter the Chinese Communist Party and defend American interests. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has more on the GOP strategy to combat the country considered to be America's #1 threat.
The House is making clear it's time to counter China's aggression and expose its strategy of undermining American sovereignty. This new committee is a signal Democrats and Republicans alike sense the urgency of acting now.
There is bipartisan consensus that the era of trusting Communist China is over.
The House voted overwhelmingly to create the Select Committee on China by a vote of 365 to 65.
As Secretary of State Anthony Blinken put it last year, China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it.
Representative Mike Gallagher, the pick to chair the committee, says its focus will be repairing supply chains, reclaiming U.S. economic independence, beefing up U.S. military posture, and preventing theft of American intellectual property.
The Select Committee will expose the CCP's coordinated whole-of-society strategy to undermine American leadership and American sovereignty while working on a bipartisan basis and with the committees of jurisdiction to identify long overdue, common sense approaches to counter CCP aggression.
7 Republicans and 5 Democrats will comprise the group, armed with the authority to hold public hearings.
We want the very best ideas. Doesn't matter where they come from. And at the end of the day, We don't need a majority and minority report. We just need one philosophy with one principle, and America will be stronger for the future to come.
In a statement on the China Select Committee, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said, quote, House Democrats will work in a serious, sober, and strategic manner to evaluate our relationship with the Chinese government and to address the rise of authoritarianism globally. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks to Caitlin. The 2024 race for the White House heats up, with new names expected to jump in the race soon. Up next, CBN News sits down with Nikki Haley. Turning now to the 2024 presidential race, Nikki Haley, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations during the Trump administration, is expected to announce her candidacy later this month. In 2021, Haley said she would not run against President Trump. According to Fox News, Trump recently told reporters, though, Haley called him to discuss a presidential bid, and he told her to go by her heart. Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, is expected to make her announcement in Charleston on February 15th. And Haley recently sat down for an interview with CBN News. Here's Wendy Griffith.
Throughout her life, Nikki Haley was told she was too brown, too young, too conservative, and too female. But instead of backing down, Nikki took it as a challenge to do something and be something great.
We caught up with Haley near her home on South Carolina's Kiowa Island to talk about politics and her new book, If You Want Something Done, Ask a Woman. It features 10 extraordinary women who, like Haley, overcame incredible obstacles to achieve their dreams. Women like Israel's first Prime Minister, Golda Meir, to the Iron Lady herself, Margaret Thatcher.
She was a grocer's daughter, and she was one that really believed in herself. That's the lesson from Margaret Thatcher. She loved Great Britain, but she really believed in herself. And she came along when it didn't make sense. She didn't look the part. She didn't act the part. She was made fun of a lot. But what she saw was the devastation of socialism at the time. And so when she became prime minister, she really wanted to change all of that. She wanted people to have economic freedom. She wanted them to have the opportunities to be whoever they wanted to be.
Like Thatcher, Haley could relate to being an outsider. As part of the only Indian family in Bamberg, South Carolina, a small rural town, she learned a valuable lesson from her parents early on.
I remember when I would come home from school after being teased on the playground, and my mom would say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And it's amazing how that lesson on the playground played out throughout my life. You know, whether it was in the corporate world, whether it was as governor, or whether it was as ambassador.
In 2004, Haley won a state house seat against a popular incumbent. And in 2011, became South Carolina's first female governor and the country's first minority female governor. During her second term, she saw her faith tested when a white gunman walked into a predominantly black church in Charleston and murdered 9 innocent people.
And at that point, I had hit rock bottom. I was so sad. I was so upset. I was trying to protect a state. I wanted everything to be okay. And I remember one day saying, you know, God, I'm broken. I can't do this unless you help me. And he was there. And I look at, even in my most challenging, darkest moments, you know, of any time in my life, that's when your faith grows. I always go back to Joshua, 1:9, be strong and be courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, because God will be with you every step of the way.
Then in 2016, President Trump asked Haley to be the ambassador to the United Nations. She agreed with conditions.
And I said, well, I'm not going to be a wallflower or a talking head. I need to be able to say what I think. And he said, Nikki, that's exactly why I want you to do this. And he was true to his word from the first day to the last day.
Haley took part in the historic vote to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel's capital of Jerusalem.
But Jerusalem has always been the capital of Israel. So it was recognizing a truth. And I remember we were sitting in the National Security Council with President Trump, and everybody was telling him why he shouldn't do it. Everybody was telling him that war would break out. Everybody was telling him all the negative things that happened. And there were only 3 of us that day that stood up and said, you need to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. When the president finally made that courageous step, for me to cast, one of the first American vetoes in years, when the world tried to condemn us for acknowledging a truth, it was a moment of pride for me.
After serving as governor here in South Carolina and later as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley says there's still one more job she'd like to have, and it's not vice president.
I don't play for second. I've never played for second. So if I end up running for president, it's to finish the deal. It's to go ahead and do it and to lead in a way that makes America proud, to lead humbly, to lead with strength, to lead with conviction, and to lead in a way that knowing that when America is strong, the world is more safe.
In the meantime, she's hitting the campaign trail for fellow Republicans while also running in a different way for herself, something she didn't think she could do.
I just decided, well, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try and see if I can run. And I think that running teaches you to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So I ran a half marathon in December, and now running has become such an outlet for me, because when you run, in the mornings, you get your life together, you prioritize, you pray, you think about all the things that are really important.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Kiowa Island, South Carolina.
Thank you, Wendy. And when we come back, everyone's favorite groundhog makes his annual weather prediction. Finally tonight, Pennsylvania's most famous groundhog emerged from his burrow today. And much like the 1993 film, this year's prediction is reminiscent of last year's. Punxsutawney Phil appeared at the Groundhog Day celebration along with his shadow, unfortunately forecasting 6 more weeks of winter. A crowd of 5,000 gathered at the Gobbler's Knob to hear the news. Phil's prediction coming as a massive winter storm sweeps through the United States. And there you have it, 6 more weeks of winter. Thank you for joining us this February 2nd. Have a great night.